Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Later, Terry Brooks will join us from Kentucky Youth Advocates. We'll talk about the landscape for those growing up in our state. But first, Kentucky's new Education Commissioner, Dr. Robbie Fletcher, is here. Commissioner Fletcher was a local superintendent in Lawrence County before applying to head up the Kentucky Department of Education. As the school bells get ready to ring, Dr. Fletcher is planning to visit many districts. He wants to put a priority on accountability as well. Commissioner Fletcher is joining us now. Welcome. Appreciate you coming very much.
I appreciate the invitation, sir. Thank you so much.
You have said that public schools made a huge difference in your life. How did that play out?
Well, one of the things I've shared with superintendents across the state, when you look up the war on poverty and you type in Fletcher, you're going to see a gentleman by the name of Tom Fletcher on the front porch with President Johnson. That is some of my distant family, but also too, a lot of times the name Fletcher was associated with poverty. Now, by the standard of what you would see on the household income form, I might have been raised in poverty, but I had a beautiful family that took good care of me throughout the time. I always had a mother that had food on the table, had a dad who was out working all the time as he could find jobs. But I didn't know what opportunities were out there. And that's what public education did for me. They gave me opportunity. For example, the very first time that I was on a plane was with my high school academic team with a coach named Frank Baldridge. The first time I saw flat ground, the first time I was in a movie theater, the first time I was on an escalator was all with my high school academic team as part of public education. So those opportunities opened up so many areas for me, and it gave me the opportunity to be a teacher, and then eventually an administrator, and now commissioner. So
you rose through the ranks to that top level as a local superintendent, and you've told the story that you were reluctant at first to apply for the job of Kentucky Education Commissioner. Why?
Honestly, at one time I didn't feel like I was worthy. I love kids. I want to serve kids. But growing up, you look at certain positions, are those attainable? Is that possible? And when you hear Commissioner of Education, is that possible from a young guy from the mountains? And as I talked to so many colleagues across the Commonwealth, as a matter of fact, even my board chair, Mr. Jim C. in Lawrence County, when I was superintendent, talked to me about the possibilities. I did more research. I looked at the opportunities, and then I applied, and then decided to turn it over into the Lord's hands at that point.
What are your goals for Kentucky schools?
If I could give you three goals, it would be along the lines of three topics. And one is to make sure all of our students have vibrant learning opportunities. If you've been in a school where a student has done a student-led conference, a colleague of mine, Rhonda Caldwell, who's the director of KASA, was talking about a kindergarten student that brought their family through and said, "This is what I'm learning in my kindergarten class." And they were leading through to talk to them about their learning experiences, and to have those student-led conferences is a vibrant learning experience. Defenses of learning. There's so many school districts across our Commonwealth that are allowing students to say, this is what I've learned in my school, this is why I learned it, and this is what I hope to do with it, and how it will transition me to the next level. Whether that be going from elementary to middle, middle to high, or high to post-secondary. So that first goal is to make sure those students have those type of opportunities, including internships, including community service type opportunities, to have vibrant learning experiences that are relevant to our kids.
Now, do we do enough to point kids in a direction? That we have these workforce issues, and we also have students who are graduating who say they have no idea what they want to do.
I think we're doing better and better across the Commonwealth, and there are pockets of excellence everywhere when it comes to introducing kids to opportunities. Moving forward, it would be great to have that where we are introducing elementary students. For example, Floyd County. Floyd County has a coloring book just talking about different careers, everything from a physician to a welder to other opportunities, just to introduce kids to the possibility. And then moving into that middle school setting where we're doing more exploration. And then when we get into the high school setting, trying to make sure kids are prepared for how they want to go. So can you do enough? I don't know if we can ever do enough, But I think schools are doing a better and better job of introducing students to the possibility of these are the careers that are available out there.
Mr. Commissioner, you would say that it is not the duty of the schools to funnel everybody in the same direction then, right? I mean, not everyone is going to go to college, not everyone's going to do a vocational job, not everybody's going to seek a career in the military.
Well, look at my own family. My daughter is in medical school. She went through and had a great experience in high school, but my son was a welder. So if you look at the two different career paths, my goal with my own children is find your passion, find what's relevant to you, find your love, and then allow the school system to help direct you in that path. How can we build a system that helps children, helps students, helps young men and women to get to the point where they want to be in their lives? And then all of a sudden, school's relevant. And a lot of districts do a great job of that.
You have said that you want to go out and personally visit schools, and you intend to do that. Mm-hmm. How much of your time can you devote to that when there's so much administrative work in Frankfort?
Well, it's a priority. And for example, at the end of August, I blocked out 2 days to visit schools in Western Kentucky. Of course, I have a lot of friends that are superintendents now. A good friend of mine has said, "Hey, Dr. Fletcher, come stay with me." So I'm going to take a trip to Western Kentucky, stay 2 days, and make sure I get into at least 4 different school systems or 4 different schools. But it's making it a priority. These are times when I am going to visit schools. I'm going to visit a lot of schools in Central Kentucky, being an opening day speaker. But again, prioritizing that time, that if block out, these are the days that I am in schools. So that's, for me, is making that a priority and having that time set aside. Given
your background, I would think this would be personal to you. The Kentucky Education Reform Act came out of a Supreme Court ruling in the state that said there was too much difference in the opportunities being offered in poor schools and those in the wealthier districts in our state. Some fear we are getting there again. Do you have those concerns?
I do, but I think our legislative body took a step in the last session by changing Tier 1 funding. And if you look at Tier 1 funding, it's the mechanism that's used to try to close the gap between a property-rich district versus a property-poor district. So when you look at those type of funding mechanisms that try to close that gap and give more funding to those property-poor districts, and then try to give them more opportunities, I think those are things that's on the radar of our legislators and on our governor's office. So that's very important that we look at closing those gaps.
How can schools handle the personnel shortages out there that they face? And I attended a meeting where you spoke on that issue a few months back before you were commissioner. And so whether it is teachers or counselors or bus drivers, districts are very hard pressed to fill those positions. Mm-hmm.
I think the first and foremost, the easy answer is compensation. How do you increase pay? How do you increase pay for not only your certified employees, but also your classified? And again, our state legislature passed a budget that was one of our best budgets in probably well over a decade. And a lot of districts were able to give anywhere from a 2 to maybe even as high as a 7% raise. And there's variances there. But in order to do that, there's the compensation piece. But also if you look at things such as Educators Rising, grow your own programs. In Lawrence County, we had 4 students that were a part of an Educator Rising group, a grow your own group, where they actually went into the classroom each and every day and worked with the students. By the end of that experience, you had the elementary kids wanting to sign their caps and gowns. The elementary kids that were like so proud to say that person was in my class. And it was hard to find one of those students that didn't have tears in their eyes about the opportunity that they had to be with students. So to give our people those type of opportunities, we hook them early and say that's possible and see what it means to be a teacher, and then we move forward. But also too, I think we need to do a better job of telling our story. Just like I alluded to earlier, and I appreciate the question talking about public education, I had a gentleman by the name of Frank Baldridge that was the academic team coach, that was the teacher that made a huge difference in my life, and he provided those opportunities for me to compete on the academic team, but also too to see parts of the world that maybe I never would have seen without his help. So if we tell those type of stories, we say this is the possibility, I think it helps us to bring people back into our profession.
All right, so you talk about public education. As you know, Kentucky voters in November will decide whether to change the state constitution in a way that would allow tax dollars to go to private or charter schools. What is your position on the school choice amendment?
I will go in and vote no very early. I'm opposed to the amendment. And the reason why, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, in my opinion. For example, schools that receive this funding, well, let's review just a little bit. It opens the door. And where's the accountability? For example, if a district takes, a private school takes in the money, do they also take on their accountability system? How does that handle private funds, local tax dollars? How does that follow a student? There's a lot of questions there that, for me, they're not answered. It just opens the door, then there's a lot of possibilities. But I will also say this, I am a public servant. If it passes, if people feel like this needs to happen, then it'll be my job to make sure it happens to the best of it for all students. How is this possible to work with the General Assembly to make sure that there's guardrails in place to have that type of input? Again, I'll vote no because I think it's hard to vote yes for something when there's so many questions. Another question I have when we say it's choice, whose choice is it? Is it really the parent's choice? Or is it the choice of the private school to say, I will take your child or I won't? In public education, we don't have that choice.
Would a commissioner have oversight over charter schools or the private schools? Or for that matter, do you have an outreach to homeschooling in Kentucky?
No, I don't have oversight at this point. I do feel like as far as homeschooling, there are so many people across our Commonwealth that do an excellent job of homeschooling. And I advocate for those people that are, if that's the best for your child, please do it. Absolutely. And however that you want to do that for your child, that's your decision. And I'm all about the decision for you to homeschool your child if that's what you want to do. But oftentimes we find out that homeschooling is, there's truancy issues across the state. And there's oftentimes that you'll have people that'll go into homeschooling to avoid any type of penalties, if you will, for truancy. So what type of accountability can the state legislature give to help make sure that we're giving all of our students the best possible product that's out there?
How do you intend to address the truancy challenge?
Well, we are doing a chronic absenteeism campaign, very first right off the bat, talking about first and foremost that, and there's two different issues here. There's chronic absenteeism and then there's truancy. Chronic absenteeism is when a student misses 10% of a school year. So if there's 170 days, they've missed 17 days. That could be for excused absences or unexcused. So you have chronic absenteeism here. But you also have truancy, which is more along the lines of a student has 3 unexcused absences. They don't have a doctor's note or a parent note, and then a student becomes truant. After 6, they're habitually truant. And then you start looking at what is of the court system, what's their role at that point. So for us, we're going to start off with chronic absenteeism and put out a campaign to say, essentially, you're missing out. Parents, your children are missing out. And also, too, imagine a student sitting at the cafeteria table and there's a tray, but no student sitting there. Or maybe there's a band class and you have all the students talking, playing their instruments, but you have one seat that's empty. And our goal there is to say, we missed you. We missed you because we know that one of the most important parts is those relationships that you build, not only to be educated, but just those personal connections. So chronic absenteeism is the first route that we're going to take, trying to make people aware and talk about how we missed you.
What advice do you have for parents as the new school year approaches?
Oh, wow. Parents, first and foremost, have your students in school. But the second thing is encourage them to be involved. Whether it be in a sports team, an academic team, a club, extracurricular, co-curricular, whatever that may be, have your students involved as much as possible because then relationships are built not only in the classroom, which we want vibrant learning to happen, but we also want to make sure that those students have the relationship built that we want to be in the classrooms. And I think those extracurricular, those co-curricular type activities, those clubs that we have, make that such a vibrant experience for our students.
Dr. Robbie Fletcher, Kentucky's Education Commissioner, thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
Hope you'll come back and report to us from time to time.
I appreciate the invitation and be happy to come back.
Stay with us now. We'll be back in just a moment. Dr. Terry Brooks with Kentucky Youth Advocates will be here. And we'll continue our theme on kids going back to school and learning and living here in the Commonwealth. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmaker. Kentucky Youth Advocate says it is working to make Kentucky the best place in America to be a kid. And yet that's a steep challenge with high rates of poverty, health challenges, and as we learned in our last segment, even school attendance. Dr. Terry Brooks spent most of his career as an educator, but now he heads up Kentucky Youth Advocates, and we welcome Dr. Brooks. Thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
Hey, Bill, we always appreciate you spotlighting Kentucky's kids.
A new school year is about to begin. We're reminded that a lot of kids come from tough environments. You recently wrote Kentuckians desperately need more from their elected officials. Your kids count report shows numbers that indicate those challenges.
Sure. Well, you know, if I'm right, you're celebrating your 40th anniversary at this station, and I was around long enough as well that you and I remember in 1990 when the Kentucky Education Reform Act passed, that folks who did not agree on the day of the week, Democrats, Republicans, rural and urban lawmakers, they worked with the governor. And it's so hard to remember that in 1990, Bill, Kentucky was the national exemplar. Folks from all over the country came to see what we were doing with boys and girls in schools. And we are so far from that. The kids count report that you just indicated, every indicator in the area of education, 4th grade reading, 8th grade math scores, high school graduation, chronic truancy, every one of those indicators is getting worse. And so our point was that there's a lot of conversations in Frankfort about public schools, but seems like there's precious few about reading, writing, and arithmetic. It seems like that schools somehow have been where you chase every social issue in the world and really don't talk about learning and how we get kids moving forward.
So what do we do? You know, the new state budget, it does provide some money for child care and mental health services and summer food programs and all of that, but how do you look for progress and yet realize we've got to reach a lot higher?
Yeah, well, you know, again, you and I are both Kentuckians, and so going way back in time, we remember those Jesse Stewart days of one-room schoolhouses.
Right.
And back then, the community rallied along with the school. And, you know, I'm somebody who just believes that unless and until we really address some of those non-academic factors, we can't move ahead. If a kid comes to school hungry or maltreated or with a toothache, it doesn't matter what that teacher does. They don't care about multiplication. And so, first of all, I would reiterate that everything can't be put on that principal or 4th grade teacher. So faith communities and local officials and moms and dads and grandma and grandpas have to rally around. Secondly, and we talk a lot about that, and I do believe the General Assembly began to move in a proactive way this past session. If you talk to a superintendent anywhere in Kentucky or a principal, the workforce issue is not a problem, it's a crisis. Across Kentucky, schools are getting ready to open, and I bet you the majority of principals are looking at that schedule and they got vacancies. They don't have somebody covering sophomore social studies. And so the other thing that we need to build on is some of those early steps that the General Assembly took last year to just address the fact that if we don't have the right teachers in classrooms, we don't have principals in those offices, all those numbers are going to continue to head in the wrong direction.
There are other issues out there that could, of course, impact kids. You've released the second annual Domestic Violence Data Report, and it shows, among other things, Kentucky has some of the highest rates of violence against women. Another huge challenge.
Yeah, and we know the correlation is if there is domestic violence in the home, the potential for child maltreatment just rockets. Violence is not siloed, and so if that's happening against women in the home, those little boys and little girls are just such high levels of risk. It also, that notion of violence contributes that in this year's Kids Count report, and again, you and I have talked about this before, there's always one or two data points that just kind of grab me.
Yeah.
This year's report, the data point that grabbed me was that Kentucky's mortality rate for kids has spiked. So we literally have more children dying today than we did a couple of years ago.
And what is pushing that number?
Well, it's interesting. This is true nationally, and it's true in Kentucky. For a long time, cancer and car accidents were the two leading causes. The leading cause now are bullets. So gun violence now has taken the number one spot for causality in child and teen mortality rates. And you and I both know when we talk about that, that is a big challenge to think about policies that are cogent and feasible in Frankfort along that issue.
Your organization has talked about vaping as a concern among young Kentuckians, not only because it, the use of tobacco products has its own issues, but it could be a gateway to other more serious drug use.
Two things about that. We did a campaign with Foundation for Healthy Kentucky a couple years ago and had young people talk about vaping. And the theme was, I just didn't know. So we now know that a single vape has the same nicotine content as a whole pack of cigarettes. So just on physiological grounds, that's big. The gateway part, I was really taken back. About 6 weeks ago, Attorney General Coleman had asked KYA to bring a group of young people to Frankfort, and to the Attorney General's credit, he spent the afternoon with them. It was around the Opioid Settlement Commission. I think the Attorney General is very committed to a prevention approach. How do we keep kids from getting into that very dangerous lifestyle? So he sat for a couple hours and simply listened. What we heard from kids in urban areas and rural areas was a consistent theme, and that is that vaping was the gateway. There was a small group of kids from South Central Kentucky, and they describe what so many people remember, which is after the Friday night ball game, people, apparently young people, they're not throwing back that beer that somehow they got, but instead they're vaping. And it was very interesting to me. I learned a lot listening to them, that the correlation that they saw between vaping and going right into opioids was direct and dramatic. So absolutely, that is becoming a health crisis in Kentucky.
Another challenge, you also believe that issues like evictions should be expunged from a family's record after a time, and that a minor, a child, should never be named on one of those documents.
Yeah, housing across Kentucky, rural, urban, is becoming a crisis. And one of the things that we see is that when a family is evicted, it's a felony and it never gets off. So again, we're not talking about not paying landlords. Yeah. We're not talking about putting landlords in a jam, but we're talking about is that really the best approach? We're especially concerned, as you referenced, that currently minors get listed and that sticks to them. So again, if I'm a little boy or a little girl growing up in a house and I already face the problem and the sort of the trauma of getting kicked out, do I really need to be blamed for that? Because most 10-year-olds are not responsible for the rent payment, and that shouldn't stick to them like glue. So yeah, we understand the challenges and pressures that landlords face. We're not trying to be insensitive to that. We're trying to think about looking ahead and seeing if we can't make a common ground negotiation on that.
Are you optimistic Kentucky can address the shortage of quality child care? We have about a minute left.
Yeah, again, we got to figure out a way to address the workforce, because that's a tough job.
Yeah.
Just like teaching's a tough job. And if I can make more at a drive-through fast food restaurant than in a child care center, I'm probably going to say, would you like fries with that, Mr. Bryant? And so I think that's the priority, is that unless and until we can figure out a career path, we're going to continue to have a problem, child care crisis throughout the state.
Overall, optimistic?
I'm an eternal optimist. I believe there are a lot more folks, Democrat, Republican, urban, rural, the Beshear administration, and the General Assembly. I think there are a lot of people in Frankfort who care about kids. And as long as they care about kids, we can make progress, and I'm going to hold on to that optimism.
All right, Terry Brooks, thanks for coming by. We do appreciate it very much.
Bill, you're great for kids in Kentucky. We appreciate all you do.
Thank you. We'll be back on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers in a moment. We do want to thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. Stay up to date with all the latest news, including all the politics, on WKYT News and WKYT.com, as well as on our WKYT News app. We hope you make it a good week ahead.